first of all, thank you so much for sitting down with us. And I want to ask you first, since I haven't really seen you since the election, you made history when you became the first appointed Latino to represent California in the Senate, but now you're the first to be elected by the people. And what does that mean to you personally? I know you grew up the son of two immigrant parents, and they worked so hard to get you to where you are. And how does this feel for you to earn this term in your own right?
There's a lot of emotion that comes with it, I have to be honest. When I was first appointed a couple of years ago, and I'm appreciative of the trust of the governor to give me the opportunity, but there's two words that I kept using together for the first 2 years, and it's a tremendous opportunity, but also a tremendous responsibility. The job itself, but also being the first, trying to represent so many. And now that it's by virtue of an election, not an appointment, the opportunity, responsibility, I think is even more elevated because it really is having earned the trust of the people and work hard not to break that trust, right? I'm going to continue fighting and working just as hard every single day for the issues that we've been talking about, not just for the last 2 years, but throughout my many years in public service. You referenced my parents, and I am that proud child of immigrants. My parents came from Mexico in the 1960s. They met in Los Angeles. It's a classic Los Angeles love story. Watching them work so hard, sacrifice, frankly, for so many years, inspires me every single day. But now I'm equally motivated by my own family, right? I'm not just the son of immigrants. I'm now a proud husband and father of 3 growing boys, 3 gentlemen is what we're trying to raise at home. And so knowing that at some point we're passing on a country and a planet on to the next generation keeps me focused and working hard.
So I think a lot of people don't realize that, first of all, you're an MIT grad and you worked your way up through local politics. You were a Secretary of State in California. Now you have this role, but a lot of people didn't know you before you became a senator if they didn't live in California. But you've made a name for yourself, not just in California, but across this country. Tell me a little bit about what that has been like. You kind of were thrown into this position. What was the learning curve like? And, why are you so motivated to be such a vocal advocate for issues that resonate not just in California, but across the country?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I have been working in public service at starting on my days in the Los Angeles City Council, my days in the State Senate. I was California Secretary of State prior to the appointment, now the election. I guess the profile is a little bit bigger for a United States Senator, whether it's television coverage or just getting a chance to work on some of the biggest issues for our country and for the planet. So the profile's been elevated as a result, and that comes with the territory. For me, it's how do we utilize that maybe to raise public awareness, help influence public opinion for the issues that we care about. It's not. I didn't just start fighting to address climate change. I didn't just start advocating for immigration reform. I just didn't, start, fighting for voting rights recently. They're personal values and have been my agenda for a long time. But I think I hit the ground running, first of all, out of a sense of urgency. If you think back to when I first joined the Senate, it was during the darkest days of COVID. Right, it was pre-vaccines. You remember the daily news, the case counts, the number of lives lost on a daily basis. My hometown community of Pacoima was called the epicenter of the epicenter. And my dad still lives in the same neighborhood, in the same house where I grew up. Whether it's friends, close friends of the family, neighbors that didn't survive COVID, I brought that sense of urgency to the job on that issue, along with so many others. And then with the appointment only being for 2 years, not knowing if I would win the next election or not, how do I maximize my impact in my limited time? Thankfully, I have at least 6 more years to continue to represent California and fight the good fight, but we don't know how much time we're going to have, so I got to make each and every day count. And last but not least, I love Angela, I love my boys, and one of the toughest parts of this job is being away from them several days, most weeks. And so Every day that I'm in Washington, I got to make it count, because if I'm not doing everything I possibly can to do good and help people, then I have a more important place to be. So it's also out of respect for family.
And you mentioned, working hard, getting out there, that these aren't issues that you've just started advocating for. You've been so vocal about getting legislation to protect dreamers in this country. I've gone to a number of press conferences where, this is an issue you care about that's personal, but immigration is a huge issue in California. We have so many dreamers there. Talk a little bit about what you want to do moving forward. Obviously, we haven't seen a solution for these individuals. How are you going to continue to fight for them in the next year?
Yeah, look, for all the good that we've done these last 2 years, from the American Rescue Plan and what that's meant, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and so much more, I think one of the biggest frustrations and disappointments is not having seen more progress made on the immigration front. Yes, it's personal. I'm a proud son of immigrants, but I also know that no state has more at stake in it than California, given the size and the diversity of our population and the size and diversity of our economy. Right, because it's important to recognize that immigrants contribute to the United States and to our economy, not just through workforce. People have these visuals of people working in hospitality. My mom used to clean houses. People working in the fields, or my dad was a short order cook working in a kitchen. Immigrants also contribute tremendously as consumers and as entrepreneurs. Right, a big percentage of those tech companies that you hear about that are changing the world and creating the future are started by immigrants. And the fact that our immigration system is so outdated, clearly broken, is a big frustration. You would think that there's more bipartisan support to help dreamers, to help farm workers. The first bill I introduced as a senator was to create a pathway for federally recognized essential workers that were so critical throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And my biggest disappointment, frankly, is hearing from some of my Republican colleagues behind closed doors say the right thing. Oh, I am for farm workers. Oh, I am for dreamers. Oh, I am for immigration reform, but they're not able or willing to say it publicly or vote accordingly. And they just immediately fall back to the excuse of, well, Biden has to get the border in control, or looking at what's happening at the border. Look, people coming to the United States seeking asylum is lawful, both by national law, by international law. And we do need to restore the asylum system. It was starved and broken by the prior administration. But somebody coming to the border seeking asylum, it's a very different person, it's a very different family, it's a very different population than an individual or a family that has been in the United States for 10, in some cases 20 years, working, paying taxes, raising families, strengthening our communities and our country. So we have to be able to help those who have earned it, who deserve better than to live in fear of deportation, while we address border safety, border security, without forgetting the humanity with which we need to approach it.
And you mentioned Republicans saying that the Biden administration needs to get control of the border, and that's been an issue that they ran on in November. And you've been tackling immigration as chairman of the subcommittee through Judiciary. So talk to me a little bit about how you plan to work with Republicans controlling the House. How can we solve this immigration crisis that we're seeing, and how do you plan to work with them?
Yeah, look, I think the solutions are there. There's a lot of good ideas that have been presented as legislation, not just my Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, or a bill that we have to protect documented dreamers, sort of similar but different category of young immigrants than dreamers as we know them. Look, many of these bills even have bipartisan support. More than 10 Republican co-sponsors on the bills, but they're not ready or willing to vote for the bills that they've lent their names to because of the pretext of the border. And again, a tremendous frustration when Republicans either here in Washington or they'll do a photo op at the border slamming Democrats for immigration, but then don't offer solutions. You know what else they tell me in private? And maybe this they do share a little bit more publicly. We have a workforce crisis in America, record low unemployment, but employers across sectors say that they need more workers and they can't find them. Wages are going up and they're still having trouble recruiting. Well, historically, we've added to the workforce through legal migration. But because legal migration has been stifled, because the backlogs and the wait times of people who are willing to come to work in the United States in job areas that we need for our economy, for our health and for our safety, when the waits are 10, 12 years or even longer, that's what adds the pressure for people to come through other means. And that's ultimately what we're trying to tackle as well.
I want to pivot a little bit. Obviously, you have been fighting for climate change and measures to protect and prevent from wildfires and study them and hopefully, protect Californians, because I think everyone has been touched by wildfires or knows someone who has been affected by them. Talk to me a little bit about how we tackle climate change moving forward, how you want to approach it in the next 6 years, but also, again, we have to see bipartisanship when it comes to this issue. Is that something that's holding, us back from that?
Right. No, look, wildfires have grown both in frequency and scale and magnitude in recent years in California. So it's sort of the exhibit A that climate change is real. It's not academic or theoretic. And it's not just a long-term concern that if we don't do something now, then in 25 years, something bad might happen. No, it's here, it's now, and it's having its impact, whether it's increasingly big hurricanes in certain parts of the country, tornadoes outside of what's traditional tornado season, and wildfires in the West as well. And so, while on the short term, I think, I'm proud that we're making some progress on things like the lifting of an arbitrary cap that the Department of Defense has had on the number of aircraft, surplus aircraft, that they can give to other federal agencies, and now, because of my legislation, to states to retrofit to use in firefighting. Right, the sooner we can tackle a fire, the more lives we can save, the more property damage we can prevent. We've also successfully passed My Fire Act, the bill that I introduced that modernizes FEMA, just like they've gotten good at preparing for and responding to other types of natural disasters, making sure they apply those best practices to wildfires in the West, so we can try to prevent fires or mitigate the impact when there are fires and help communities recover more quickly. But longer term, look, we know we need to address carbon emissions. The science is absolutely clear. My background's in engineering, so we're big on data, big on science. And so whether it's changing where our electricity comes from, weaning ourselves off of fossil fuels and moving towards more renewable energy sources, transforming the transportation infrastructure across America, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's electrifying public transit systems in California and throughout the country. These are big, big strategies that we've been making tremendous progress on between the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, huge down payments on that green economy future for the country. But we got to keep leaning into it because literally our planet is at stake.
Earlier this year, I spoke with you just after the Roe draft was leaked that the Supreme Court was going to overturn the right for a woman to choose. And you were outraged by that. And I can tell that's still an issue that you are very passionate about. You haven't forgotten about it, even though it was 6-7 months ago. How do we move forward here? How do you and Democratic senators plan to use your majority to try and protect a woman's right to choose? Is the filibuster still the biggest obstacle?
I do believe the filibuster is the biggest obstacle, not just on codifying a woman's right to choose, advancing immigration reform, restoring a federal right to vote that was lost. Look, there's so many critical issues that need to be worked on, so we will continue the focus and the pressure until we codify a woman's right to choose, among other rights. But I really want to invite people to take a step back and think for a second why we're having this debate to begin with. It's because the Supreme Court is now in the hands of a majority of extremist justices that in the process of undoing Roe v. Wade, in the process of, for the first time in our nation's history, taking away rights from not just women, but the American people more broadly, they laid the groundwork for undoing other rights which is why part of Congress's response to that was not just an attempt to codify reproductive rights in federal law. We came up a little bit short, but we felt the urgency and the need to advance a bill to provide federal law protection to same-sex marriage, to interracial marriage, because in the opinion issued by the Supreme Court, authored by Clarence Thomas, he put these other rights in the crosshairs for the Supreme Court. He thought we need to revisit other rights that we thought were a matter of settled law. And so we'll continue the legislative push. The fact that the Senate is going to continue to be in the Democratic majority, now with 51 instead of just the minimum 50 Democrats, will be able to continue to confirm federal judges at all levels. Maybe eventually, if there's another opening at the Supreme Court, but circuit courts and district courts that will respect precedent, as they all claim to do when they come through for confirmation hearings. And then, of course, working with partners in states across the country, whether it's in state legislatures or through state ballot measures, to continue to provide those very, very fundamental and important protections.
You mentioned voting rights, and that is something that you have really expressed frustration that we can't get solved here on Capitol Hill. You have a unique perspective, though, because you were a Secretary of State, just one of 4 serving in Congress right now. So talk to me a little bit about how you're trying to approach those across the aisle who might not agree with your opinion on the matter, and trying to broaden, protect voting rights in this country, because it has become such a hot button topic, and surprisingly, because it really shouldn't be.
Right, it shouldn't be. And it wasn't for the 50 years that the Federal Voting Rights Act, and specifically the preclearance requirement, we won't get into the technical details, was in place. But I guess a little bit of important history here for context. In 2013, the Supreme Court, again, are extremists for many years, not just recently, in a ruling that we refer to as Shelby v. Holder, took the teeth out of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And what we saw happen immediately was a wave of bills in state houses across the country to make it harder for eligible citizens to register to vote, stay registered to vote, or actually cast their ballot, whether it's voter ID laws, purging of voter rolls, you name it. In 2014, I ran for California Secretary of State. And people told me, look, you don't have to worry, California is different. We're not going to see that wave of those efforts come here. But I thought California, as we do in so many policy areas, had an opportunity and an obligation to lead. And so when I ran for Secretary of State and was elected, we started advancing all the pro-voter and election security reforms, from expanding vote by mail, in-person early voting, ballot tracking, automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, more sophisticated post-election audits, all those things to allow more easy opportunities for eligible people to vote, have their vote counted, and people have faith in the results of the elections. I say all that because we have now taken all the excuses off the table for people in other states, blue or red, that say, well, that may work in California, but it's not here. Nobody can argue they have a larger population. Nobody can argue they have, more voters. California actually has more voters than there are people in Florida, just to give you a sense of scale. Nobody can say we're more diverse than California. There's no more excuses. It's now just a matter of political will. We've shown that these reforms work. It's good for democracy, good for election security. And when I'm now, as a senator, trying to engage in this debate, I'm one of the few that can talk to every single senator and answer those questions, explain exactly how it works and why these are good. And we're going to keep fighting until we once again secure a right to vote in federal law.
So you've been elected for a new term that is entirely your own. You'll be sworn in January. What is the number one priority for Senator Alex Padilla, and what would you say is the biggest challenge facing Congress when they come back in January?
Yeah, well, I mean, so many top priorities, right? The fight for immigration reform is still front and center. To protect voting rights is still front and center. For as much progress as we made on climate change, it continues to be an issue. Trying to have the federal government do its part, working with states and counties and cities to address homelessness and housing affordability is critical. To think that we have to stand up and make sure that we tell people Democrats are going to defend Social Security because it continues to be under attack by Republicans. To say, for those who have paid into Social Security or Medicare, we're going to defend those benefits when you're eligible to receive them. But if fight for those we have to, fight for those we will. But I think we're going to keep the focus and try to think ahead a little bit too. We have a changing economy. Changing technology that's influencing, all aspects of our daily lives. We've got to make sure we're looking at cybersecurity and privacy concerns, but also economic growth and national security concerns. Healthcare, access to healthcare. Not as much progress as we made with the Affordable Care Act and more. There's still some people who are uninsured, or the cost of healthcare itself we've been working hard to contain. That was a big provision in the Inflation Reduction Act. One other issue that's personal for our family: mental health. It was a crisis before the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been exacerbated since COVID first arrived in the United States. There's a lot more awareness now, but we have a long way to go to invest in the services that people are needing, and certainly the therapies that can allow people to continue to live very, very productive lives.
So I know you spent a lot of time on the campaign trail in California, not just for yourself, but for other members. I saw you out there on the trail for other House members or candidates. I know you spent time in Arizona, and you were traveling because you are a very successful fundraiser, and people want you to come and share the Democratic message. I know you've already said that you don't really want to, chair DSCC in 2024, but if Senator Schumer called on you for the position, would you consider it?
I tell Senator Schumer, and I have told him, he needs to talk to my wife about this. Look, it's the last 10 years, not just the last 2 years, have been very, very busy for not just my career, but for my family. From getting married and having children to other elections and doing my part as chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State to when I was Secretary of State, overseeing consequential elections and overseeing census outreach. So given the intensity of these last 2 years, I think my kids deserve for me to have just one full-time job at a time and try to get a little bit of a better rhythm and healthier balance before we take on the next extracurricular activity.
And people are already talking about 2024, and I know you've just won your election, so you can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. People are looking at the presidential election. The president's expected to announce as early as next month, maybe later into 2023. Are you ready to back him for a second term as president? And then if not, who do you think would be a candidate that could lead the Democratic Party?
Look, I've heard President Biden repeatedly say it's his intention to run again, and my intention is to support him, do everything I can to help him get reelected in 2024. Help take back the House, help keep, if not grow, our Senate majority, and keep making progress on all the issues that we've been talking about.
And as we wind down here, I want to end things with a little bit more of a fun question, because you do travel back and forth, I'm told by your staff, every weekend to spend time with your family. First of all, you must have a lot of frequent flyer miles, but how do you pass the time flying back and forth, and how do you get over the jet lag? Because that's a tough trip.
It is tough, but worth it given the opportunity to do good in this job, but also the fulfillment I get when I get home and I get home to those hugs and kisses and spending family time on the weekends. It's the only quiet time I get on the plane ride, because when I'm in Washington, I'm on the go, go, go. And when I get home, I try to do as much as I can to help around the house and pack lunches in the morning and, take kids to school. And of course, there's sports and other activities over the weekend. So what's a typical plane ride? Not gonna lie, I usually nap for the first hour or so, maybe catch up on a little reading. It's, again, quiet time, and maybe respond to a few emails, but the flights go by pretty quick.
Do you have any book recommendations for us, or are you reading briefing material?
A little bit of briefing material, a little bit of books. The last one that I really, really enjoyed, I finally got around to Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential. So highly recommend that read.
Has your dad given you some cooking advice since he, worked as a cook? I'm sure he taught you a couple of things. Are you taking that and your Anthony Bourdain lessons home to your wife?
See, so my dad started giving us kitchen advice probably at about the age of 8. Okay. Like, no, this is how you dice an onion. This is how you slice a tomato. But truth be told, my mom was the magician in the kitchen. So I've been blessed by the influence from both of my parents, and love spending time in the kitchen whenever I can.
Do your sons know I know one is in high school now, but do your younger sons actually know what your day job is?
Well, they know the title. My oldest is 15 and active in Model UN at school, so I think there's been a little bit of influence there. And I learned from him, frankly, from his activities in world affairs. My youngest, Diego, he's 7 years old. He thinks it's cool, especially when they're studying social studies and he sees a picture of the Washington Monument or something in a textbook. My middle boy, Alex, we had a really interesting moment when he was here visiting back in April, just walking through the hallways as the Capitol was reopening because of COVID. And I was sort of expressing to him that a lot of people come to Washington to lobby their representatives, their House member, their senator, on issues of healthcare or the environment or safety or education or whatever it is. And I could see in his face he got a real appreciation for the complexity of the jobs, because there's a lot of important issues. How do you do it all when time is finite and budgets are finite? But we have to make it count, and we're blessed to be in a position to again, lend our voice to try to make lives better for working families across the country.
And my last question for you, you are one of the younger members of the Senate. I hear next year you will be celebrating a milestone birthday. What would you say to your younger self if your younger self could see you now in Washington, the first Latino senator to represent California?
Wow. Well, first of all, on the being one of the younger senators, it is a unique opportunity to weigh in on some issues. Childcare, for example. When we talk about childcare or early childhood education, the importance of vaccines for young people, it's not my grandkids that I'm talking about. Like a lot of my colleagues, it's my very own children. So I bring the real world experience of what those costs are, what those struggles are, to the discussion here as we debate budgets and policy. What would my younger self tell me? I don't know. I was dreaming about this for a long time, but I think there was a lot of moments where I thought, is that really a possibility or not? Maybe put it this way. When I was first appointed, or now elected, I still get asked, is this a dream come true? Being a United States Senator for the state of California. And the honest answer is no. Because when I was a kid, I never dreamt that this was real, that this was possible. And I hope that through my service and how I serve, that for a lot of young people, not Alex Padillas, but little girls and boys of every race and color and economic background, that they can genuinely believe that they can do it.
Thank you so much, Senator. I really appreciate it.